The crowd gathered at dawn, but no one spoke. Not because they were afraid of the condemned man, but because they were afraid of what they were about to witness. Rome had seen violence before. It had built its empire on war, discipline, and power. Its soldiers had marched through burning cities. Its executioners had ended countless lives without hesitation. Death, in Rome, was common. Punishment was public. Order was sacred. But this sentence was different. When the magistrate announced it, even hardened men felt something shift inside them. Some looked down. Some stepped back. A few quietly asked to be replaced. They did not fear blood. They feared what this punishment required them to do. Because this was not simply execution. It was something deeper, something personal, something that struck at the very heart of Roman identity. This is the story of the punishment so brutal that even the men ordered to carry it out hated it. Stay with us till the end for valuable insights. Like, subscribe, and share to support the channel. To understand why this punishment existed, we must first understand Rome itself. Rome did not rule the world through kindness. It ruled through structure, through discipline, through clear lines of authority. Every citizen had a place. Every family had an order. Every law had a purpose. At the center of Roman life stood the family. Not the army, not the Senate, not even the emperor. The family was the foundation of everything. And at the center of the family stood one man, the father. In Roman law, this role was known as Patria Potestas, the power of the father. The father held absolute authority over his household. His children, his wife, his slaves, even his adult sons were under his control. He decided marriages. He controlled property. He approved careers. In early Roman tradition, he even held the legal right to decide whether a newborn child would live or die. This was not seen as cruelty. It was seen as order. The father represented stability. He represented discipline. He represented Rome itself inside the home. If the father was strong, Rome was strong. If the father was obeyed, Rome was secure. So when a child raised a hand against their own parent, Rome did not see it as simple murder. It saw something much worse. It saw rebellion against nature. It saw a breakdown of the sacred structure that held society together. It saw chaos. The crime had a name: parricide. To kill one's own parent was considered unnatural. It was believed to offend not only the law, but the gods. It was an act that disrupted the balance between family, state, and divine order. Other crimes threatened Rome's borders. Parricide threatened Rome's soul. And because it threatened something so fundamental, Rome believed it required a punishment unlike any other. Not quick death. Not public spectacle. Not simple execution. This punishment would reflect the depth of the betrayal. It would remove the criminal not only from life, but from the world itself. It would deny them earth, deny them name, deny them memory. Rome believed that when someone destroyed the foundation of the family, they no longer deserved to stand among humans. The sentence was rare, but when it was spoken, everyone understood what it meant. The condemned would not simply die. They would disappear. And that disappearance would begin with a sack. When the court declared a person guilty of parricide, the room did not erupt in noise. There was no cheering, no applause, no satisfaction, because everyone present understood what the verdict carried. Roman law was structured and formal. Magistrates followed procedure. Witnesses were heard. Evidence was considered. Rome believed in order, even in punishment. But when the crime was parricide, something changed in the air. The sentence was not shouted. It was spoken carefully, almost heavily. The condemned would suffer what later generations would call Poena, Cullei, the punishment of the sack. This was not a normal execution. It was a ritual, a statement, a warning carved into the memory of society. Rome believed that some crimes broke the natural order of the world. Parricide was one of them. A son killing a father, or a child killing a parent, was seen as an attack against the structure that held civilization together. The household was the smallest form of the state. If the household collapsed, the state could follow. So Rome did not respond with ordinary death. It responded with symbolic destruction. Before the execution, the condemned person was stripped of dignity. This was not done in anger. It was done as part of a ritual separation. The criminal was no longer seen as fully human. They had crossed a line that placed them outside the moral world of Rome. Their head was covered. Their hands were bound. They were beaten, not in rage, but in ceremony. This was not punishment alone. It was transformation. Rome was preparing them to be removed from society. Then came the sack. It was large, heavy, made of leather or thick cloth, strong enough to hold what was about to be placed inside. But the sack would not hold only one living being. Roman belief was rich with symbols. Animals carried meaning, and this punishment was built on meaning. Inside the sack, executioners placed animals chosen with care. A dog, a rooster, a monkey, a snake. Each creature represented something chaotic or unnatural. Together, they symbolized disorder, the very thing the criminal had brought into the family. These animals were forced inside alive. The condemned was pushed in after them, and then the sack was sealed. This was the moment many executioners feared, because from this point forward, they were not distant observers. They were responsible for enclosing a human being with terrified animals inside a dark, suffocating space. Unlike a beheading, which was quick and final, this punishment required time and sound. Inside the sack, panic would begin immediately. The animals would react to fear. They would claw, bite, scratch. The condemned would struggle. There would be movement. There would be muffled screams. And the executioners would hear it all. Roman executioners were professionals. They had overseen crucifixions. They had carried out floggings. They had watched prisoners face wild beasts in arenas. But this was different. This required closeness. It required waiting. Some historical accounts suggest that even hardened men found this difficult. Because this was not just killing. It was deliberate isolation. The sack would then be carried to water, not land, never land, because Roman soil was sacred. The condemned, having broken the most sacred bond of family, was seen as unworthy of burial in Roman ground. The sack would be thrown into a river, a harbor, or the sea. If the condemned survived the suffocation and the animals, they would drown. No grave. No marker, no funeral rites. In Roman belief, burial was essential for peace in the afterlife. To deny burial was to deny rest. It meant the soul would wander, unsettled. The punishment did not end with death. It extended beyond it. This was why the sentence was feared, not only by criminals, but by those ordered to enforce it. By the time the sack was sealed, something had already changed. The condemned was no longer treated as a citizen, no longer as a son, no longer even as a criminal. In the eyes of Rome, they had become something else, a being cut off from the natural order. The leather was thick, rough, heavy. Once closed, almost no light entered. Air moved only in small, desperate breaths. Inside that darkness, there was no space to stand properly, no room to escape what had been placed beside them. And they were not alone. The animals inside the sack were not calm. They were frightened, confused, forced into a tight space with human movement and fear. The dog barked or snapped. The rooster flapped violently. The monkey clawed in panic. The snake coiled and struck at movement. Rome believed these creatures represented chaos. But inside that sack, chaos was not symbolic. It was real. The condemned could not see clearly. They could only feel. Claws scraping skin. Feathers brushing their face. A sudden bite. The shifting weight of bodies pressing against them. Breath growing thin. Outside the sack, the executioners held it steady. And they listened. This was the part that made the punishment different from all others. A beheading was fast. A crucifixion, though cruel, created distance. The condemned was elevated, separated. But here, the suffering happened close. The sounds were near. The movements were violent and sudden. The sack shook. It thumped. It twisted. The muffled cries were not loud, but they were constant. And the executioners had to remain present. They could not look away. They could not leave. Some accounts suggest that even seasoned executioners found this moment difficult. Not because they doubted the law. Not because they felt mercy. But because this punishment forced them into intimacy with suffering. They were not striking a sword from a distance. They were holding the container of chaos in their hands. The Roman state demanded obedience. Soldiers obeyed. Officials obeyed. Executioners obeyed. But obedience did not remove the human reaction. The sack would grow quieter over time. The struggle would slow. Breathing would become weaker. Sometimes the condemned would die inside the sack before reaching the water. Suffocation or injury would end it early. Other times, there were still movements when the sack was lifted. Because the punishment was not complete until the final act. Rome did not want the condemned touching its land in death. Roman soil was sacred. It represented citizenship, belonging, order. A parricide had broken that order. So the sack was carried carefully toward water. A riverbank, a harbor, the open sea. The crowd followed at a distance. Still silent. There was no celebration. This was not spectacle. This was removal. The executioners would swing the sack once. Then release. It would fall into the water with a heavy splash. For a moment, it floated. Then slowly, it sank. If life remained inside, it ended there. Drowned. Buried not in earth, but in water. No grave. No name. No funeral rites. In Roman belief, burial connected the soul to peace. Without burial, a spirit could wander, restless and forgotten. This was the final part of the punishment. It did not just kill the body. It denied memory. It denied belonging. It denied rest. And this was why even hardened men felt uneasy carrying it out. Because Rome was not simply ending a life. It was attempting to erase a person from existence itself. The punishment of the sack was rare. Rome did not use it often. And that was intentional. Its power did not come from numbers. It came from fear. Most Romans would never see it with their own eyes. Many would only hear about it in whispers. Parents mentioned it quietly when warning children about obedience. Judges referred to it in serious tones when speaking about family loyalty. Writers hinted at it without describing details. It became something larger than law. It became a shadow. Rome understood something important about power. A punishment does not need to happen every day to control people. It only needs to exist. The idea alone was enough. Because this punishment attacked something deeply personal, the family. In Roman culture, loyalty to family was not just emotional. It was political. It was religious. It was social order. The father represented authority. The household represented stability. If a child could kill a parent, what would stop a citizen from betraying the state? Rome believed discipline began at home. So this punishment was not only for the condemned. It was a warning to everyone else. It said clearly, there are lines you cannot cross. Other crimes threatened property. Some threatened leadership. But parricide threatened structure itself. And Rome valued structure above all else. This is why the punishment was so symbolic. The sack represented isolation. The animals represented disorder. The water represented rejection. The absence of burial represented eternal unrest. Everything about it sent a message. You are no longer one of us. And that message did not stop with the criminal's death. Families carried the shame. The name could be damaged. Neighbors remembered. Even an accusation of parricide could destroy a person socially. Before any trial ended, suspicion alone could isolate someone. Rome believed that such a crime was so unnatural that anyone associated with it felt stained. But behind the law, there were real stories. Not every case was simple. Some sons lived under cruel fathers. Some daughters faced abuse. Some families were divided by inheritance disputes. Greed, anger, desperation. These existed in Rome just as they exist in any society. Yet Roman law rarely asked why. It focused on what happened. If a parent was killed by a child, the structure had been broken. And the response was automatic. There were cases where confessions were forced. Cases where political rivals used accusations to destroy enemies. Once the charge of parricide entered a courtroom, the shadow of the sack followed closely behind. Mercy was rare. Appeals were limited. The state moved forward. Because for Rome, maintaining order mattered more than understanding motive. Even emperors were careful around this crime. To be connected to it, even through rumor, could damage legitimacy. An emperor's authority depended on respect for tradition. Association with such a crime could weaken that respect. So the punishment remained. Feared. Almost sacred in its severity. And yet, something was beginning to change. As centuries passed, Rome slowly transformed. New ideas entered its borders. New beliefs questioned old traditions. And the sack, once seen as necessary, began to feel uncomfortable. Not weak, not ineffective, but unsettling, even for Rome. Empires do not transform in a single moment. They shift slowly. Ideas enter quietly. Beliefs spread gradually. What once felt unquestionable begins to feel heavy. For centuries, Rome believed its laws were perfect. Structured. Balanced. Necessary. Punishment was not about emotion. It was about order. Every crime had a place. Every sentence had a reason. But as time passed, Rome encountered new philosophies. Among them was Christianity. This new belief system carried ideas that were unfamiliar to the old Roman mind. It spoke of forgiveness, of mercy, of the possibility that even the worst sinner could repent and change. This did not erase Roman law overnight, but it introduced discomfort. The punishment of the sack began to feel different, not because Rome suddenly became gentle, but because the ritual nature of the execution, its symbolic denial of burial, its animal symbolism, its complete erasure of the person, felt tied to older traditions. Pagan traditions, ancient fears about spirits and restless souls. Christian belief placed new importance on the soul's redemption. Even criminals were believed capable of seeking forgiveness before death. The sack did not allow space for that. It was designed not just to end life, but to deny dignity in death. As Christianity spread through the empire, some officials began to question whether such a punishment still aligned with the values Rome now claimed to represent. Gradually, enforcement became inconsistent. Some emperors continued the tradition. Others quietly replaced it. Instead of the sack, a condemned parricide might face beheading. Still severe, still final, but less ritualistic, less symbolic, less theatrical in its suffering. The old punishment began to fade, not because it was declared evil, not because Rome admitted regret, but because it became inconvenient, uncomfortable, embarrassing. As Rome reshaped its identity, it preferred to highlight its legal achievements, its engineering, its governance. It wanted to be remembered as the foundation of civilization, not as a society that once sealed people inside sacks with animals and threw them into rivers. Historians softened descriptions. Writers avoided detail. Art did not depict it. The punishment slipped into the margins of records. Fragments survived in legal texts. References remained in scattered writings. Enough evidence stayed behind for later generations to piece together what had once been reality. But it was no longer central. It became a shadow of an older Rome, a Rome defined by ritual severity and absolute obedience. And yet, even as it faded, the message it once carried did not disappear. Because the punishment had never only been about parricide. It had been about control, about loyalty, about the belief that order must be protected at any cost. Even as Rome changed its methods, that core belief remained. The empire continued to demand obedience. It continued to value structure. It continued to prioritize stability over mercy. The sack was gone, but the mindset behind it lingered. And perhaps that is what makes this story unsettling even now, because it forces us to ask whether societies truly abandon their harshest instincts, or simply hide them more carefully. Today, when people speak of Rome, they speak with admiration. They speak of roads that still stretch across Europe. They speak of laws that shaped modern justice. They speak of architecture, philosophy, discipline, and power. Rome is often remembered as the foundation of civilization. But civilizations are never built on greatness alone. They are also built on fear. The punishment of the sack was not an accident. It was not a mistake in the system. It was created carefully, structured deliberately, approved by law, carried out by officials. It existed because Rome believed some acts could not be forgiven. Rome believed that when the foundation of the family was broken, society itself was threatened. So it responded with something absolute. Not just death, but erasure. The condemned was denied earth, denied burial, denied memory. The message was clear. Loyalty to family was not optional. It was sacred. And if that sacred bond was destroyed, the offender would no longer belong to the human world. What makes this story disturbing is not only the cruelty, it is the obedience. Executioners who hated the task still performed it. Soldiers who felt uneasy still followed orders. Magistrates who may have felt doubt still read the sentence. Because in Rome, obedience was survival. To question the law was dangerous. To refuse an order could end a career or a life. So the sack was prepared. The animals were placed inside. The rope was tied. The river received what Rome rejected. And the city moved on. That is perhaps the most unsettling part. After the execution, the streets filled again. Markets reopened. Soldiers marched. Families ate dinner. The world did not stop. Rome continued to call itself civilized. It continued to believe in its moral superiority. It continued to present itself as orderly and advanced. But beneath that image lay a memory few wanted to speak about. A heavy sack, a silent river, muffled sounds fading underwater. Over time, Rome tried to forget this punishment. It softened the language. It replaced the method. It allowed it to drift into history. But forgetting does not erase reality. The sack once existed. Real people were sealed inside it. Real executioners carried it to the water. Real crowds stood in silence and watched. This story forces us to look beyond monuments and marble statues. It reminds us that power often hides its harshest truths. Every empire presents itself as necessary, as just, as civilized. But when threatened, even the most advanced societies can choose annihilation over understanding. The punishment of the sack tells us something important about Rome. It valued order more than mercy. It valued structure more than compassion. It believed that fear was stronger than forgiveness. And perhaps the most troubling truth is this: the executioners hated it, yet they still carried it out. Because in Rome, loyalty to the system mattered more than personal feeling, and silence was safer than resistance. So when we admire the grandeur of Rome, its achievements and its legacy, we should also remember the things it tried to bury. Not to judge blindly, not to condemn without thought, but to understand that even great civilizations carry shadows. The sack sank beneath the water. The river closed above it. The crowd slowly dispersed, and history moved forward. But some echoes do not disappear. They remain beneath the surface, waiting for someone willing to listen. The silence at dawn was not only fear. It was recognition. Recognition that even the strongest empire could create something so brutal that its own men wished they did not have to carry it out. And that silence still speaks. If you enjoy dark, untold history, subscribe because we uncover what others won't.